empathy is the most radical of human emotions. It's the basis of all strong and equitable relationships and communities. Empathy is the foundation for all cooperation and collaboration. And we know that we can't change the world alone. I also believe that empathy should be the starting point for all leadership. My name is Enni-Kukka Tuomala, and I'm the world's first empathy artist and designer. I'm here to start the radical empathy revolution, to challenge all of us to become not only empathizers, but catalysts for empathy, to become empathy leaders, both within our shared working cultures, but also within our societies at large. I want to invite you all to use empathy as a radical resource and a tool for cooperation and collaboration, to set a new, radically empathic vision for the future of work, to set a vision that is not only more empathic, but is more equitable, is more emotionally connected, more emotionally meaningful, and fundamentally more regenerative, not just for us as humans, but for our planet at large. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. What does empathy, the word empathy, mean to you, I wonder? To me, empathy means trying to understand different perspectives or different experiences. And in some cases, empathy can even mean feeling what someone else feels. But in the wider cultural context, we often describe empathy as a warm and fuzzy soft skill. We see empathy as a feminine, emotional trait and value. Now, none of these words in themselves are bad in any way. In fact, they're all very positive descriptions for empathy. However, in this context, this language is often used to deliberately bypass and disregard the scientifically proven transformative power that empathy possesses in helping us understand each other, helping us better work together and live together. I wonder if these are some of the notions of empathy that you may have thought of yourself. I think it's absolutely vital that we challenge and redefine the way we see empathy and the way we use empathy, and actually stop underestimating it and stop disregarding it and really propel it to the core, the center of our culture, both at work and at home. This underestimation of empathy and the power of empathy is also often true in business, even though we're starting to see the disproportionate impact that empathy can bring to our businesses. Actually, in the US currently, some 20% of companies already offer empathy training to their employees. And this is a percentage that's actually predicted to double in the next decade. What's important to note, though, is most of this empathy training that is offered really focuses primarily on the individual need to become a more empathic person, to become a better person, as we often see it. And by placing the weight of empathy solely on the individual, we actually disregard the structural need, the absolutely desperate need to bring empathy into the very core of the systems and the structures that ultimately govern our working cultures. This is why my work focuses on systemic empathy. Through my practice, I thrive and aim to bring empathy into the foundations of our societies, into the foundations of our organizations and our businesses, to share this opportunity of empathy, not just on an individual level, but looking at it more collectively within our communities and within our larger, wider culture, as well as our wider environment. Thinking about empathy in business, it's also really important to note that empathy has a direct link with your bottom line. There's now research that proves that companies with more empathic leadership and more empathic cultures actually have higher financial profits. So empathy is not just a nice to have, but it's actually directly linked to your financial results. We have a crucial opportunity to really propel empathy into the heart of the conversation about the future of work and use empathy to create this more meaningful, equitable, and regenerative vision for our planetary future. As an empathy artist and a designer, my practice is focused on channeling empathy as a powerful tool for positive social change. I work with a variety of partners, from organizations around the world, to communities, to businesses, and even sometimes specific local areas. I run my empathy studio from London, where I've lived for close to 15 years now. And I lead empathy projects all around the world, from London to Tokyo and from New York to Helsinki. I aim to transform empathy from an individual feeling to the collective and radical power that it truly is. And in order to do this, I re-examine and redefine the pillars that make our shared culture in order to create the foundations for a more empathic shared culture. I redefine the spaces that we occupy in order to create more space for empathy. I re-examine and redefine the roles that we're assigned and the roles that we adopt in order to reassign these in a way that serves us all equally. I also aim to uncover the rules, the unwritten, unspoken rules that really govern the way we behave and the way we interact, in order to rewrite them so that they actually serve us more empathically in a more equitable manner. And finally, I aim to redefine the relationships that underpin everything, the relationship that we have with ourselves, the relationship we have with each other, and the relationship we have with our environment. By being an artist and a designer, my superpower is making intangible things tangible. So what I aim to do is transform empathy from this somewhat intangible and abstract concept and feeling into something that is more concrete, more practical, and more everyday, a real tool and a resource for our everyday interactions and our everyday situations, both at work and at home. And really, it's about making empathy something that we can see and feel and touch, and sometimes even something we can step inside of, something that we can inhabit. Now, I've had the pleasure of creating work across the public and private sectors, from working with the BBC here in London, to the City of London, to the Parliament of Finland, where I've had the pleasure of working with a group of members of Parliament to bring empathy into the heart of political culture. Together, we've co-created a collection of practical empathy tools for politics and for politicians to use in order to bring empathy into political dialogue and into political debate. I've also had the pleasure of working with many companies, from Innocent to GE to Virgin, where I collaborated with 50 global CEOs across the Virgin network, creating a bespoke empathy experience for them, to challenge them to consider empathy as a part of their future planning and strategies. I had a chance to work with these CEOs across 2 days at Richard Branson's estate in Oxfordshire a few years ago, and it was certainly a very eye-opening and important experience and discussion for us all. But this is to show you that these opportunities to bring empathy into our everyday working cultures, but especially in the work that we do to envisage a different future for our work and a different future for our planet, is absolutely vital. So thinking about empathy actually is all about perspectives and different points of view. And it actually consists of 2 different types of processes. So we talk about what's called cognitive empathy, which is simply about understanding someone else's perspective or experience. We also talk about what's called emotional empathy, which is the more extreme form of empathy, when we actually adopt someone else's emotional state. Now, when it comes to situations at work in a professional context, we actually use cognitive empathy much more often, where we, on an intellectual level, strive to understand where someone else is coming from and strive to understand the perspective that they're able to bring into a situation. Now, thinking about this, it's very important to remember or be aware of that we're actually, as humans, pre-programmed to empathize more with people who are like us. So people who share our physical characteristics, they might share our language, they might share a cultural background. But it is possible for us to reprogram ourselves to actually form new directions for empathy towards new people and in new situations. Because empathy is actually not a constant. It's something that fluctuates throughout our lives and even throughout the day, depending on our environment, our mood, or even our stress level, which I think is always very worrying to know. The more stressed we are, the less likely we are to empathize. Possessing power, being in a situation and a position of power, also impacts our ability to empathize. There are research studies using neurological brain mapping and brain scanning that explore the effects of sustained power on our abilities to empathize. And what these studies prove, that sustained power actually physically blocks our brain's ability to empathize. Researchers are actually equating this to traumatic brain injury. That's how much the makeup of our brain actually changes through power. But it is possible to mitigate this as well. It is possible for us to learn to have more empathy in different situations and towards new people. And this is really the foundation for all of my work. Before COVID, before all our borders were shut, we were experiencing the biggest movement of people around the world since the beginning of the Second World War. And we're living in a time where more languages and cultures and religions and ideas are mixing than ever before. But yet, at the same time, our societies and even often our working cultures are really struggling to create more emotionally meaningful ways to connect and to really communicate and understand each other. And this is really where empathy becomes such a powerful tool and a resource for us in order to do this. We are currently living in a time where we need more empathy than ever before, but at the same time, we've never had less empathy than ever before. The global empathy deficit grows all around the world. This is well documented through research, and it's been spoken by everyone from Barack Obama to Pope Francis, who called it the globalization of indifference. Research proves this as well around the world, but we at the same time are presented with this huge opportunity to bring more empathy into our everyday lives, to consider how we can propel empathy into the structures of our businesses, the structures of our systems, healthcare, education, and even political decision-making. Because fundamentally, empathy is shown to increase collaboration. It's shown to increase positive behaviors towards other humans and even towards the environment. Empathy also reduces unconscious racial bias and reduce conflict between different groups across different value systems. So that is our opportunity to move into a world where we can imagine a more radically empathic world, where we redefine our relationship with our natural environment, with each other, and fundamentally with ourselves. So I want to invite you all to join me for the radical empathy revolution. And I want to ask you, how will you become a catalyst for radical empathy? How will you become an empathy leader? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Enni-Kukka, for that. Well, thank you for leading this radical empathy revolution. What a timely and important mission you are on. And we thank you for contributing to our evening tonight. I'd like to ask our colleagues listening tonight to also contribute to the discussion. It seems that our Tallinn crowd is more quiet than our Stockholm and Helsinki crowd. So please don't be shy. Show some empathy for our speakers and do send comments and questions, and we can get a conversation going. I also reach out to our wonderful jury members if you want to ask questions or comment what you hear. We would be very appreciative. Now, there would be so much to ask. I have 7 questions I'd like to ask. I don't know which one I'm going to choose. But, perhaps one thing that you mentioned at the macro level, if you want to instigate change and get empathy rolling in an organization, you have to understand, where the deficit is, what you need to do, understand the barriers to empathy. But ultimately, though we have research on the empathy deficit that you mentioned on a macro level, how do you go into small organizations and measure this deficit? How you can only really have an effect on something that you measure. So give us an idea of how you measure this.
Thank you for bringing that up. That's an absolutely vital point. And I do work with organizations and businesses across different scales. I think often we do start with a lot of research and measurement, really doing what I call empathy mapping. So you already talked about the empathy deficit and these empathy gaps that we all possess, both on an individual level, but also on a collective level within each culture, within each structure. So it's really about investigating and uncovering what those empathy gaps are within a specific organization and the internal culture there. So really the starting point is the sort of four pillars of an empathic culture that I mentioned. I investigate the spaces that we work in, the spaces that we come together in, not just physical spaces, but digital spaces as well. Examine the roles that everyone performs and plays in any given situation within the organization, and how those shift and how they impact our abilities to connect and empathize. But also, very importantly, aiming to uncover and understand the unspoken and unwritten rules that really set the culture, and what kind of empathy gaps or deficits they might possess, which are often actually historical. Often our cultures are based on people or ideas that are actually long gone, but we haven't perhaps done the work to move past them and re-establish another more empathic culture. And then finally, the relationships that we have, whether that's with ourselves, with other colleagues, with clients, with collaborators, partners, or senior leadership, that is very important as well. So really this process of uncovering the empathy gaps is really the key starting point. And as you said, setting out some measurements to then be tracked throughout the work is vital.
Somehow listening to you tonight has made me feel more empathic. Thank you. Thank you so much.
I'm glad to hear that. Thank you very much.
Thank you.